Good morning, guys. I find it rather interesting and unintentional that I should wear all black today when discussing Scene 7 of Streetcar Named Desire. If you guys remember, we've been discussing how a lot of different colors and clothing could be symbolic for what's going on in a specific literary piece. And in this case, black does represent things like death, destruction. It's an ominous sign. And like I said, it's kind of appropriate because in Scene 7, we're going to discuss the death of Blanche's reputation that she is so carefully built since arriving in New Orleans. So let's go ahead and pull up our PDF and get to page 104, which is where Scene 7 starts. We are opened up with a day in mid-September, and we can see that they're getting ready to celebrate Blanche's birthday. Okay, and Stella's decorating as Stanley is walking in. And, while this is going on, Blanche is bathing yet again for a long period of time. We assume this is how she's coping with probably her anxiety and what's going on inside of her mind. And this sort of annoys Stanley. You can see that, he's always annoyed by anything that Blanche does because he makes some sarcastic remarks on page 105. Stanley also dropped some pretty big bombs on Stella while Blanche is in the bathroom in this particular scene. And we got to go to page, 106 to kind of read about that. So scroll down to that part. So he brings up one of the lies that Blanche tells. He says that, she's been feeding a lot of lines to Mitch that are not really true, that she's pretty pure and innocent, that she's only been kissed by other guys, but we know that that's not true. He actually says that Blanche is no lily, and lilies are actually symbols of being pure. It's a pure symbol. And so Blanche not being one, again, suggests that she has had intimate affairs with others and that she's not really telling the truth to somebody like Mitch. Going further down, he brings up that she is pretty famous back where Blanche and Stella come from, and obviously it's not for good reasons. She's not respected by any party there, and one of the reasons why she's not respected is incidences at a hotel called the Flamingo. Okay, this is on page 107. There it says that, the Flamingo is kind of a sketchy place to begin with, where they don't really, the people that work and own the place don't really get involved with the goings on of the hotel, but whatever she was doing there was so bad that even they had to kick her out of it. So we don't know 100% what happened in the hotel, but if you know anything about hotel rooms, we kind of imagine that she was engaged in some intimate affairs there. Whether or not that was for money, we don't know, but either way, it was questionable, and especially questionable for that time period. All right, so anyway, that was one of the things that she's kind of been hiding from Stella and Stanley and Mitch and just really anybody at, in New Orleans where she's traveled to. So another thing is that, she continues to invent other lies, and Stanley's going to sort of blow some of those up as well in the next couple of pages. Stella, after hearing about the Hotel Flamingo, seems to be in somewhat denial over, the things that her sister is doing. So anyway, she doesn't believe them. She believes that just people are spreading rumors, but Stanley claims that, he's checked up on everything. He's verified that what he's found out is in fact true. If you look on page 108, he says he still has more information to give her here. At some point, because she was doing all these questionable things, they got tired of her presence in Laurel, and especially the men in that particular town. And after a couple of dates with her, they know to get out of that relationship. They wised up, that the lines that she's giving is the same old act, and they move on. They also, the town regards her as somewhat of a crazy character. Okay, so that she's somewhat insane over there. I also thought it was kind of interesting, if you look on page 108, that he uses a simile to compare Blanche to poison. Okay, basically saying that she infects everybody around her, and is destructive, like poison is. So that's something that you might want to know for maybe a future worksheet. Moving further down, we also know that the reason why she's not going back to teach school is not because of her nerves. It's actually because of her involvement with a young student. So this young boy was 17 years old. She got mixed up with him. So apparently preying on young boys is a pattern for Blanche. And of course things were discovered. The boy's parents found out, and got involved, got in touch with the superintendent, and they basically threw her out. You can't really do something like that. So anyway, that's why she left the school. Another thing that's interesting before I move on to further pages is on page 108. While, Stanley is telling all these things to Stella, Blanche is in the bathroom singing. And some of the lines that she says is, "It's only a paper moon, just as phony as could be, but it wouldn't be make-believe if you believed in me." I find that rather appropriate that she would sing a song like this because, Blanche is a pretty phony character and tends to make believe often, and wants people to believe in her fabrications and what she's invented. So anyway, another thing that I want to talk to you about in terms of Blanche is, not only she's singing, but she's got these little peals of laughter, little breathless cries, is like a child frolicking in a tub. This sort of depicts Blanche as this child, kind of fitting because she does kind of act like one. Anyway, I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about that. So moving forward, we're moving on to page, it looks like 110, and this is where Stella is trying to defend her sister by saying that she doesn't believe all these stories, and she thinks that the supply man was rotten enough to spread these rumors about her. And, she does acknowledge, though, that her sister has done some questionable things in the past, and has always been a somewhat flighty person. But this is too far, according to Stella. And Stella does reveal information to Stanley about Blanche's past marriage with a young man. And what's interesting about that is if you go at the very bottom of page 110, she describes the young man as a degenerate. So this sort of reflects the views of homosexuality in that time period. Because as we discussed, the man was gay, that he was involved with an older man, and that's how Blanche found out about it. So you can see that, again, they do not regard homosexuality as good. Being called a degenerate is a pretty big thing. A degenerate means an immoral or corrupt person. So that's how they view these people. So anyway, times have changed a lot, now, but it's just interesting to kind of examine what that looked like at the time. Okay, so anyway, moving further on page 111, you can see that Stanley's reasons for telling Mitch about Blanche's past is to sort of protect him because, he and Mitch are great buddies. They fought together. They're on the same bowling team. He just felt that if he didn't disclose this information to Mitch, that he would be carrying some guilt around, that he's throwing his buddy out to the wolves there. Okay, he believes he needs to have all that information before moving on, which he knows won't probably happen because Mitch is a fairly good guy. So there's that. So we know that more of that is discussed on page 112 when Stanley says that, after knowing what he knows, Mitch isn't going to jump into a tank of sharks. That's something that's kind of interesting because it is a metaphor, something you might want to know, wink, wink. It implies that, Blanche is a somewhat risky and dangerous individual, much like sharks would be. So he's not going to, jump in with Blanche, much like jumping in with sharks. Okay, it's dangerous. It's life-threatening. So something to know. All right. If you look on page 112, at this 112, not 112, we've got Stanley at this point in the play. He's clearly kind of had it up to here with Blanche. He's reached his limits with her. He's increasingly annoyed, and you know that this is causing a conflict with his wife. You know, how would you feel if your husband or your significant other is kind of bashing on your sister? It's causing that conflict with Stella. You know, she's trying to do her best to defend Blanche, but, you know, Stanley is also her husband, and I'm sure he brings up some good points. So, you know, Stella's just really caught in the middle, and that's a hard place to be. So anyway, you know, Stanley believes that somebody like Blanche should be shunned for her behavior, that it's unacceptable. I want you to hold on to that statement, because as we read, we're going to find out some interesting things about other characters. Okay. Moving forward, on the bottom of page 112, Stanley does reveal another piece of information that sort of shocks Stella, and that is that he's bought this bus ticket for Blanche to get the heck out of Dodge, you know, get out of New Orleans. He doesn't want her there anymore. So this bus ticket symbolizes different things for different people. So I told you, you know, as mentioned previously, you know, for Stanley, that means a ticket to freedom of this awful sister-in-law. For someone like Stella, that's a recipe for disaster. You know, it means that she has to choose between her husband and her sister. So that for her is going to be difficult. And then finally for Blanche, it's basically a reality check. She's going to be thrown out into the world to kind of sink or swim. And that's what that bus ticket will mean for her. So anyway, that's something to know. If you look on page 113, we have a little more of Stanley acting sort of aggressive. As soon as Blanche gets out of the bathroom, finally, for what seems like 12 years, he slams the door shut. This is, again, very fitting for Stanley. He's been doing this entire play. So it's not really a surprise there that he would do it now. Notice that on page 114, we've also got Blanche continuing to demonstrate characteristics of alcoholism. She's got a drink in her hand again. She's got this highball glass that she's, you know, tinkling, and she believes, you know, that a cold drink always gives her a brand new outlook. So here she is drinking again to cope with her issues. You know, this is getting close to the end of the scene, and now that Stella knows what she knows, she's acting sort of weird to Blanche, and Blanche is picking up on that, because scene 7 closes with Blanche staring fearfully at Stella, who pretends to be busy at the table, so she's trying not to act off. And, you know, the distant piano, this is the scene directions here, the distant piano goes into a hectic breakdown, which I find to be very fitting that Williams would throw this in at the very end, because I think it pretty much aligns with Blanche's state of mind at the moment. It's hectic. She's close to breaking down. All it takes is one small thing to do so. The final thing that I want to discuss with you before we kind of close with scene 7 is just talking a little bit about Stanley. You know, my question to you is, how do you feel about Stanley as a character? On my end, I can evaluate and throw in a few different things. We can argue that Stanley can be considered a good guy, a hero to a certain degree, because he did serve his country when fighting during World War II. We also can respect the fact that Stanley is trying to build a life. He is he represents an immigrant family, immigrant population trying to move into the U.S. and make something of themselves and achieve this sort of American dream. So we can kind of say, okay, there are some positive things about Stanley, but there are also things that we really can't ignore. You know, we can also perceive Stanley as this sort of villain because he abuses his wife, and he does this more than once. He's not very nice to Blanche, basically from the beginning. And he also drinks and gambles excessively. So there are some negatives here as well. So I just wanted to bring this up because, you know, Stanley is not just all one side, you know, of things. He's not just all bad. And he's not just all good. Just makes him a little complex. We will talk a lot more about Stanley and his character in the next several scenes before the play concludes. So anyway, hopefully this helps you guys. And if you have any questions about scene 7, just be sure to email me. Okay? See you later.